Chapter 91, The Dance with the Devil Part 4. Terrorism. It's already done wonders scaring people. That's what it'll be. It'll also be like religion again, scaring people of an invisible face that might not really be there. Of course, then there's going to need to be some form of terrorist attack that's going to need to really scare everyone into continuing the arms race. The last Cold War that had us taking up arms happened because of an attack on American soil, Pearl Harbor. I was there and saw how it inspired the nation unwilling to go to war overseas to change their minds, and Roosevelt allowed it to happen. Wonder if the next president will then allow it to happen too. Something similar has to happen, and definitely to Americans again. A mass murdering of American hostages, like the ones that might have happened in Iran, releasing biohazardous weapons, or hijacking a plane and crashing it into a... Oh, shut the fuck up! Enough trying to look into your crystal ball. Try coming back to reality. Fucking Nostradamus here, spinning his ones and zeros to try and predict the future. Mr. Dorian paused for a second as he came back up for air, and then shook his head at Michael and said, I live in the real world. What world do you live in? Still, all I hear you yapping about is murdering millions. And I don't understand how it's going to start a revolution. Mr. Dorian walked back inside the security offices and came back out rolling a TV on a stand, then picked up a remote and turned it on. Mr. Dorian then changed the channel onto a live news feed. There was a female broadcaster on the TV with big hair, too much makeup, and shoulder pads spanning the entire screen. Kinda hot though. Shit. I can't stop thinking along those lines, can I? We have some breaking news about the man most people in the city have been referring to as Big White Head. Since earlier this morning, our station and many others have been facing some unknown entity that has been meddling with our broadcast and has been peddling a message called the Age of Rage to viewers around the country. This, some say, has led to the uprising of many riots across New York City, as the National Guard has been finally called in to maintain it. Up until now, no one from our station and other stations have been able to identify where the source has been coming from and how it was being done. That is, until now. Michael began to scratch his head with where Mr. Dorian was taking this, as he looked at the screen, then back to Dorian, and then thought how maybe if he could find a weapon on one of the dead commandos that were laying about, he could end this. That's what I can do. And I ain't going to chicken out killing him now. I can't. But as he searched the one dead body that was closest to him, while Mr. Dorian's eyes were glued to the screen, he saw how he wasn't able to find anything he could use, and then realized Mr. Bonhoeffer's mercs must have already cleared the area of weapons, that of which Michael could use. Fuck. From our reports, it seems that this mysterious figure known as the Big White Head is actually supposedly an American CIA operative by the name of Samuel Francis Dorian. What's most alarming based on our reports is that the man has managed to smuggle a large bomb of some sort somewhere into Manhattan and is bent on detonating the device at any given time. Now we take you to a live feed of the press conference at the White House. That was my doing. Tipping these reporters off about the bomb, said Mr. Dorian while still glued to the screen. Once Michael heard the White House, he had quickly turned his attention back to the screen that Mr. Dorian had pulled out. On screen, Michael now saw that cowboy actor President Ronnie on the screen standing behind the podium, looking not a day over 110. There were giant American flags waving behind him, and it seemed like the press conference had only just started. Good, perfect timing. This was what I was waiting for, said Mr. Dorian. Excuse me, Mr. President, is it true that this man, Mr. Samuel Francis Dorian, has been a long-standing CIA operative in the U.S. since the Eisenhower administration? Asked one of the press boys that the president had pointed out first. Yes, it is true, but I want to go on to say that this man, Mr. Samuel Francis Dorian, is no longer one of our agents and is a fugitive of the law, replied the president, seeming a bit too calm considering the circumstances of what the conference was about. So, is it also true that the man might possibly have had a chance to smuggle a bomb into Manhattan? Asked the same press boy. I cannot comment on that at this given time, but I doubt that this man is really capable of such, and is only using it as a ploy to send the people of New York City into a state of mass hysteria, replied the president. And then this came in. Mr. President, there's been some horrifying reports that this man might be carrying an actual nuclear device in his possession and willing to detonate it, asked the same press boy again. There you go, it's done, said Mr. Dorian. Once that question was asked, the whole conference room broke into a clamor, as the press boy that leaked that info seemed to be going way out of line with his questions. Excuse me, young man. We have heard no reports of this Samuel Francis Dorian being in any possession of a nuclear bomb, and I'm very curious as to where you're getting this absurd notion from, replied the president while eyeing the man in a suspicious manner, then turned his gaze to one of the Secret Service men as if to suggest something. I mean, Mr. President, how has this happened? How has there been a man like this under your administration been able to do all this? If the reports are true of an actual nuclear device, millions of American lives might be at risk of this madman that your administration has kept secret up until now. I mean, based on our information of the history of this man, he's a World War II Medal of Honor winner, of all things. I mean, I don't understand how an American hero such as this could have gone this far. Continue with the same press boy. I guarantee you and American people, there is no way that this man has managed to smuggle a nuclear bomb into Manhattan. I want to stress this again, that I find it absurd, young man, that you find this as any ways as being possible. There's no way as I, as president, would allow that to happen, concluded President Ronnie finally, as he waved his hand off and asked for someone else with questions. Mr. Dorian then turned off the TV, and as his head continued to expand bigger and bigger, his gaze spanned up to the ceiling, marveling at the grandeur of everything he had accomplished. He wasn't even looking at Michael, but he still seemed to be directing his attention towards him. You see, son, that's how a small figure like I can take on the most powerful nation to ever exist on this planet and win, said the big white head as he smiled with a sense of triumph. Unfortunately, though, that press boy I had implanted in that conference is going to be dragged away later, and Mr. Dorian then just shook his head. And now seeing this, something else came to Michael. Wait, what if the bomb goes off and everyone thinks it's the Soviets that did it, and it could start WW3? Gasped Michael. Mr. Dorian shook his head and began wheezing again. I told you, the Cold War is just a bunch of political bullshit. WW3 can never happen. You think America and the USSR are stupid enough to start Armageddon? Anyone that believes in the Cold War is a real thing beyond just stupid cock-measuring politics is a moron. Key figures that start wars want stupid 20-somethings like yourself, I'm in my 30s, to go wage them. People of your fresh out of high school age too. While they sit back and watch the fireworks, they don't want to see those fireworks coming back and explode in their faces. And these aren't fireworks we're talking about here, explained Mr. Dorian as he continued to wheeze. Michael shrugged. If America claims this as a Soviet attack, then we're going to be forced into WW3, and neither we nor the Soviets want that ever. Also, perfect timing too with this conference here. I was waiting for this moment, without that press boy there planting the notion into the minds of America that it could be a man that's part of their own government behind all this. After the bomb went off, the government could have then spun it around as to suggest somewhat as an outside terrorist attack, some unheard of figure to take the blame. But they can't do that now. Everyone is going to know the players involved and who is responsible. That's how you turn their fears around on the real enemy and expose them for who they are. After this, they won't be afraid of their minds of Russians or the Chinese or even terrorists. They'll be afraid out of their minds of their own countrymen. Like a shot heard around the world, once that bomb goes off and reduces this city to ash and rubble, the revolution will then happen. Of course, in these days, Unfortunately, a simple gunshot can't start revolutions anymore, and neither can a small bomb like a daisy cutter. A simple bomb will scare them, sure, but not out of their minds. A nuke, on the other hand, will do that. These days, you need something really big to wake people up, to make it happen, and a simple firecracker won't do, said Mr. Dorian, shaking his head again, seeming troubled. Even though Michael still couldn't understand half the shit this rambling lunatic was saying, still, how he was devising to turn everyone against their own country now seemed clear. It made sense. It made horrendous sense. He wants to scare the shit out of everyone, to have them turn on each other. After such an event, the terror that would spread across the country, maybe the entire world, was definitely going to be enough to drive everyone into mass hysteria. Michael knew there was nothing scarier than the sense that you can't even trust your own prowess, your own abilities, your own hands. Staring down at his mitts, Michael could see that. Making you go so far as to start thinking they're possessed and have free will of their own, or something. Michael had become terrified beyond anything when he found himself murdering the only person that still mattered to him. There's nothing more terrifying than to be unable to trust one's own self, and for this matter, a nation to trust its own. That's how America would feel when facing themselves in the mirror after tonight, facing their own country that was supposed to be out defending them from terrors such as these. The methods of this madman's madness was now beginning to make sense of how he planned to start a revolution, but Michael still couldn't understand why he wanted to do it. I don't know. Something about the whole ranting thing he did felt mediocre or fake. I don't know. Made up, so I don't think none of that shit was the real reason. Fascism, smashism, whatever. Sounds like a bunch of bull. For whatever reason, Michael just wasn't able to fully buy this devil's story. Something about him just seemed off, and it had everything to do with the man being unable to face Michael when he was explaining his diabolical scheme. Maybe he's just that much of a psychopath. Maybe it's just that simple, and he wants everyone to go stark raving mad like he has. But looking into the twitching, twisting, massive, sweat-riddled face of the big white head, who continued to flap his lips in silence, Michael continued to ponder what those broadcasts, those vibes were about that Mr. Dorian was making earlier. Much of the time, him mumbling about generations and terrorists and whatnot wasn't even directed towards me. Obviously, he's not trying to convince me of any of that. That's what a man does when he looks you in the eye and tries to tell you something. They want to read your eyes to see if it sticks. It's like he's trying to tell his shit to himself, facing himself in the mirror and trying to